So, I'm here to talk about Capistrano specifically and why you might want to consider not using it and why you might think that you should probably write a replacement. I've been maintaining it for a long time, almost 5 years now. It seems unbelievable now, but I really think it's time for somebody to replace it and for somebody to take some leadership in this area, because actually I'm really sad, nobody cares about deployment. Everybody, when I meet them, they say, hey, what's it like maintaining Capistrano? Everybody's using that, right? That must be amazing. And you say, yeah, actually everybody just complains that I changed something, they broke their deploy, they couldn't test it, and that makes me kind of sad. And I think DevOps, and specifically being programmers, bringing the stuff that we learn from Ruby to the operations guys, we can learn a lot. But we don't really understand what's involved, and that's kind of a problem for us. We know that we use Capistrano, we know that we use something, it goes to Git, maybe we use Heroku, and I'm kind of afraid that many Ruby programmers fear that deployment is this scary thing. We kind of do it, push the button, close our eyes, and hope that the site stays online. And you're all laughing because every single one of you knows that's exactly how it works. And I think this is a big part of the problem. Whether we have architecture or where does our application end and the infrastructure begin? And there was a time when you ran Rails server, you had Postgres or MySQL running on your notebook, and it just basically worked. And then somebody had this bright idea, now we need Memcache, now we need Redis, now you have to use NoSQL, MongoDB, and all of a sudden to run your local development, you're running 5 or 6 processes, and now there's Rescue, Redis, and multiple things, and it's a mess. It kind of starts, you have your operating system, you get some certificates, package manager, some SSH keys, GitHub, logs. Wow, why are they upside down? PowerPoint ate my presentation. Virtual host, app code, schedule jobs, database, cache, logs. Why is that stuff upside down? Doesn't matter. That's a real mess. And there's no tools for managing this. Some things like Chef exist, but they're totally overkill. Some tools like Capistrano exist, and they're not powerful enough. And people kind of misuse them. There's some stuff called deprec for reusing Capistrano for provisioning your machines. And it works, basically, but it's the wrong tool. It's really the wrong tool. Because this is what a modern application looks like. Again, sorry, PowerPoint ate my slides. What is that? 12, 2, 4, 6? That's too much software. It's way too much. But unfortunately, that's the stuff we have to deal with every day. And I don't know, let's see a show of hands. How many people know this feeling that there's just too much software in a modern application? Put your hand up. And do any of you feel like the tools that we have are good enough? Come on, hands. Alright, there's one guy back there, I guess. You must be new here. Ruby's terrible for deployment tools. Yeah, it just doesn't work. It looks something like this. Let's just go through them. Show me your hands if you know the tool. So, Mina? It's totally new, like 3 days ago. Capistrano, come on, there we go. Scalarium, I guess there's no Germans here, that's really big over there. Chef, yeah, most of you. Heroku, should be everybody. Vlad, do you like Vlad? That's my main competitor for Capistrano, and I never met those guys. I'm really hoping I do someday. Puppet should be like Chef. Yeah, about half of you. And Bosch? Bosch? You look really happy. You like Bosch?
Yeah, we work with Cloud Foundry and Real Bosch.
Ah, cool. For everyone else, he's working with Cloud Foundry, and they wrote that tool is for them. It's something they use for provisioning clouds, for running clouds, so that you can have your own cloud. It's kind of meta, but it's the new thing. It looks really good, but it's really complicated. I want to dig into some of the tools very quickly. Kind of looks like this for me. When you think about provisioning, like getting the real hardware, getting the getting the virtual machines, configuring that, keeping the configuration somewhere. That's kind of patchy. Some of the tools which I'm happy about don't try and solve that problem. Configuration is something like package management, more like what I think about Chef, and deployment is getting your application out there and running for me. So these two are software as a service, so it's okay when they do everything because they do it pretty good and you pay for that. Bosch, did I get that right? Bosch is doing basically everything, right? And it's overkill. Chef and Puppet, I kind of controversial. They don't do anything for making sure that you can get the hardware so that you can get the EC2 stuff or whatever. There's some extensions for that. I don't know how well they work, but I heard people are using them. I think they mostly shine for configuration. I also have a project where we use Chef to do the real deployment, which makes me feel kind of bad because I'm supposed to be representing down here. But that also works for us. The only thing that upsets me about that is that I know if somebody changed the server config and I want to deploy the application, I have to redeploy the entire cluster configuration, and that scares the hell out of me. It shouldn't, I have confidence, but it's not a relaxing way to work, and if somebody asked me to do that at 5 p.m. right before my free time, you know, never gonna happen. I really wish I could say some more about Bosch. I think a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about have been resolved by Bosch, but it's a really massive tool, and it's really, really hardcore. There's a 1.5 hour presentation from Dr. Nick. If you know his name, he's famous in the Ruby community, and he's just recently discovered Bosch, and he totally loves it, and gave a 1.5 hour talk, and I still have no idea about it after 1.5 hours of somebody trying to sell it to me. It looks really nice, and I hope some of you will take the time to look at this because it looks great. I gave Vlad and Mina 2 red squares because they compete with Capistrano, and I'm kind of picky that way. That's okay. Both of them actually are just doing one job quite well, and I think that's the way we should be going with these tools. When I think about what Capistrano is doing, all yellow is bad, because I think that means, I guess most of you will agree, that it does pretty much everything if you do it just right, but it doesn't do anything really, really well, and it doesn't make people happy. That doesn't make me feel great, and I want to change that. So I encourage any of you, please open a ticket, come and talk to me, tell me about your experiences with Capistrano, and I will improve it. Because it would be nice for once to build something that makes people happy. Because at the moment, every time I push a change, people complain. And I did take out the biggest site in Germany once by changing the Capistrano defaults. So again, I'm responsible for a lot of downtime, and I feel bad. Okay, what comes next? We spoke about all of these tools doing very, very many different things. And actually, in the last slide, I didn't talk about Mina because it's really, really new. For very short info about that, Mina is a Ruby DSL that looks like Capistrano. I think it's not 100% compatible, but the result of Mina is a bash script that it then uploads via SSH and just runs it. It's claiming some serious speed increases over Capistrano, but doesn't support any kind of clustering. It might work for a lot of you guys who are using Cap and really not getting what you want out of it. Mina's been released since Tuesday. I haven't had a lot of time to play with it, but the website's really beautiful, and in 2012, that means a lot. I don't know if the guy's a front-end designer and he wrote a tool better than Capistrano, I'm just gonna go kill myself. You can't get through a talk about deployment without talking about the philosophy behind Unix. And just in my 24 hours in this country, I noticed pretty much everyone's running Linux, and I think that's amazing. Probably because Apple products are double overpriced, but yeah, it's really, really good that everybody's having some experience with these tools. The Unix philosophy, for anyone who doesn't read as many really old books as I do, is that every tool should do one thing and do it really, really well. That's why you have stuff like sed and awk and cat and perl and everything. You can push some text in, send it through a pipe, send it somewhere else. I'm not suggesting that we do deployments via a pipe, although it could work out. That's what we're supposed to be doing, building reusable tools that do one job and do a really, really good thing with it. And I feel with Capistrano, it's gone a little bit sideways. We do kind of a bunch of everything, and we don't do anything really, really perfectly. I'd like to reduce the scope of Capistrano and encourage more people to write more plugins, so that I can focus on keeping it fast and doing one thing really well, which for 90% of people is deploying a Rails application to one server somewhere. I worked at a company in Germany. They had 300 machines, and they were deploying, when they did a deploy, which wasn't very often because they were so afraid, they were deploying a 500,000 line Perl application, their database sharding daemon, a Ruby application, and they were deploying it to 300 machines in the middle of the night because they were so afraid. You can imagine that. And this was the site I crashed because I changed some symlink and nobody tested it. And they like, hey, the last couple of deploys were okay. And they did a deploy on lunchtime on Monday, and the site was offline for 4 hours. Not my best time. I think Capistrano might be any tool which is usable for that scale is going to have too much learning involved for guys like you working on small applications who just want to put stuff out there and feel confident. We talked about it. I want to pick on some server software right now. I want to stop talking about the tools that exist to get your stuff to the server, and talk again based on the Unix philosophy, which pieces of software do we use almost every day, that all of us are using, that violate this principle about doing one thing and doing it well. And I'm going to pick on, how many did I keep? I kept 3 slides about some software which I guess most of you use, and hopefully I can spark some opinion and you can come and tell me that I'm wrong after my talk finishes. But I'd love to talk with any of you about that. So, does anybody know? What's Apache? It's a web server, right? So why are we embedding application servers inside of web servers? Why are we doing load balancing with web servers? It doesn't make sense, and it makes things more difficult. It's double cost to put a load balancer in front of an Apache machine, and then it gets kind of out of control configuration-wise, but it's not a solution to embed features for application serving or for load balancing or for connection throttling. None of that stuff belongs, none of that stuff belongs in Apache really, but it's there, and none of us ever question why it's there. Which leads me on to this. I have to admit I really like this software because I really hate doing server stuff, and I really hate being the ops guy. Unfortunately, I can't really get out of it because everybody knows I wrote a big chunk of Capistrano, and whenever it comes to deployment, all that work comes to my desk. But I really dislike Passenger. Those guys took a problem that the Ruby VM was slow, and they took a problem that it was difficult to deploy a Rails application, and they solved that with an Apache module. And you know, it worked. A lot of people are using it. Let's see hands again. How many people have live sites on Passenger? And are you happy? Yeah? Good. There's a no back there. Now I feel better. I'm not the only one that doesn't like it. Yeah, I want to make you think about that. Just, does that functionality that you're relying on really, really belong in that software that you're using? You know, think about how many of you are using the terminal day to day. Again, let's see hands. How many people are using cat and ls? Great. And that works, right? I mean, how would you feel if somebody took away those pipes from you and made you go back to using Excel to filter your... Nobody wants that, right? And I'm afraid that if, as a community, we continue to go down this route of trusting the out-of-the-box solution, the easy, totally insane Apache module that does way too much, then our tools are never going to get better. if we as a community would have pushed the Ruby VM maintainers, we would never have been stuck with Ruby Enterprise Edition, which again worked for a lot of people, but was a totally insane solution. Those patches should have been pushed into Ruby core. Here we are, Ruby is used predominantly for web development, and yet the one thing we need, which is better GC and better memory allocation and heap allocation, they didn't merge it for what, 5 years? And that's okay for us to solve our own problems. It really is to have Ruby Enterprise Edition, one community of engineers and developers, and we're not idiots. And just because that's in Japanese language doesn't mean that we shouldn't be pushing them to fix the tools that we rely on. I'm actually working together with the guy who wrote the GC patch for Ruby, which became Ruby Enterprise Edition. It helped keep Twitter online. And that guy, he's a really interesting guy. He's old, like 65 years or something, used to be a professor in a university, and got hired by this German company, Zing. He got hired there because we built the whole thing in Ruby and it just didn't work. In development mode it worked, in test mode it worked, and then we deployed it to an application with 2 million hits an hour, 80 million users in the database, and not surprisingly, the whole thing just broke. And we didn't have any clue what to do, and we're some pretty good engineers, most of us. All of us are way too young to really know what real engineering is about. And yeah, Stefan sat down, took one look at Ruby, called us all idiots, and wrote a patch for the garbage collection. He's doing it right, and we need to understand more about our environment, more about the tools, more about everything, because otherwise we end up with mod rails, and we don't end up fixing the original problem. I'm going to pick on another tool next. Can I see your hands again? How many people have got Monet in production? Happy with it? Anyone really happy? Perfect, that's not a single person. Monet is an old tool, really, really old tool. And it does one thing quite well. It's restarting processes if they die, for anyone who's not familiar. One problem with that is that it starts them in a really stupid way. It doesn't know much about inetd or upstart or runit or bluepill or any of these other tools. So you have to tell it about them. And you don't tell it about them with regular shell scripts, bash scripts, environmental variables, any of that normal stuff. You have a very specific Monet configuration language, which is powerful enough that you feel like it might work until it doesn't, and then you're stuck. Monet also has a really big problem, is that now that we're reaching this time of like zero downtime, any downtime is unacceptable, we're running running services on clusters of machines. I had a deployment where I was using Monet to checksum a release file, this revision file that Capistrano creates on every deploy. But the problem was, every machine in the cluster would see that file change at the same time, and they would all shut down, and they would all reboot the server the slow way at the same time. That led to a lot of downtime, and it usually recovered pretty fast, but because it was kind of synchronized and it wasn't smooth, and many of the machines that came back up first were then totally overloaded, and it was a really unreliable way to do the deployment. But also, as many of you might know, Capistrano doesn't have a way to do a rolling restart. It just doesn't exist. And it's the case that the tool is moving more slowly than the real world. Monet has this problem that it can start and stop services, and it can restart a service by stopping it and then starting it again. But many of the things we use, if any of you are using Unicorn, you know that Unicorn responds to a special Unix signal which does a graceful restart. And Unicorn isn't the only piece of software. Much of what we use has a graceful way. Apache has a graceful way to restart, Nginx, and Postgres even. As long as Monet doesn't support that, then it's not as useful as it could be. And yes, there's a patch actually for Monet to support graceful restarts, but I think it doesn't belong in there. I think there's a tool missing. And I think this is an opportunity for some of us who are feeling this problem, that Monet doesn't work for us, or that whatever, passenger mod rails doesn't work for us, or Capistrano doesn't work for us, and I'm on that vein, I encourage all of you to go home, rewrite something, and make Capistrano obsolete. Because we'll get to that later, but you can. Here's 3 problems which I want to encourage the graceful restarts. 3 problems that I want to encourage all of you to think about. We're in a special place in Ruby where we're squashing the boundaries between developers and operations. We have tools like Chef, which are operation tools written in Ruby, which means sysops are learning Ruby to learn Chef and then realizing that they can be programmers as well. We knew that all along. We knew that sysadmins were the old guys who didn't know anything and they should wake up and learn something. We're in a special place. We're in a really good place to make these changes to operations. Chef is one of the perfect examples. It's written in Ruby. Ruby is a terrible language for doing anything networking or text related. Yet Chef is a tool that loads text files and does commands over the network. And it's used by thousands of people, maybe even millions, and all kinds of companies, big and small. These 3 things are problems which I think we can solve. Truth source is kind of enterprisey, and I realize I've been working too long in big companies. The truth source is just to say, what is the current status of the application? Like, what hardware do we have? What IP addresses does it have? What are the firewall rules? You know, how should the application look? How should the system look? And of course, Chef has something built in for this. It's data bags and configuration files, all done with YAML. And what I see is people who are using Chef already, one of my experiences maintaining Capistrano, people who are using Chef already, they have all of that information in Chef, but they're too afraid to use the Chef deployment recipe because they really don't want to deploy their whole cluster just for a bug fix on their application. So they're using some horrible tools to load the Chef configuration, export that as YAML, and then feed that back into Capistrano. You know, it works for them, but honestly, does anyone feel good about that? All of you are laughing. That's a terrible idea. I think somebody, somewhere, and it could be any of you guys, because it's really not a really difficult problem, could build some tool which maybe loads some YAML files, makes it available on the network, and also makes it available to a local Ruby process for storing configuration information, for just storing IP addresses. Like I said, IP addresses, subnets, whether it's at EC2, what the API key is. Don't connect it to a Chef or Puppet, don't connect it to Capistrano, just make it a Unix tool. And we can get that information out and put it into anything else. The next one, process signaling. Short info, for most of you are using Linux, so I saw that, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but in case it's new to you, every process in Linux can receive something like 10 different signals, like kill, term, -9. Those are the ones we all know about. There's some are reserved for user space, one of which is USR2, which Unicorn uses to trigger a graceful restart. Now, that whole thing is awesome, and it works really, really well. It's worked for some 40 years, and we never had to change it. But the problem is, you need sudo to signal another process, and that's kind of insane. If the process is running as, whatever, Lee Hambley plus the name of the application that's, you know, user and group, why can't I signal the process which is in my group? It just doesn't work. It's some restriction in Unix. I don't understand why it's there, and there's no way they're ever going to change that. And they probably shouldn't. And probably I'm missing something, some good reason why that's not possible. But I don't understand it, and that means every deployment I ever had to do, sudo is enabled. And is that the same for you? Can any of you have a reliable deployment, including restarts, without sudo? Okay, damn, that's not a single hand. This is a real problem. And did any of you hear about, let's see again, do any of you know about the really serious bug in sudo last week, 2 weeks ago? There's a bug in every single version of sudo, which if some hacker on your machine is able to enable IPv6, just enable it, but there's no IPv6 connection, then sudo will allow him to do anything. There's a missing break in a case statement, and it really is, If the IPv4 check fails, then it falls through to the IPv6 check, which just returns true if there's no IP address for IPv6. Sudo is dangerous. It's a tool we all rely on. We all know it's kind of dangerous and stupid. I think there's space for a Unix daemon which controls sending signals from users in the same group to other processes, so that your team can run restricted user accounts and just ask that daemon, please, could you send that signal? And it doesn't have to be start, stop, restart. We don't need that paradigm on top of the signals. The Unix has these signals for a long time and they work, and it's not that easy as start, stop, and restart. You know, we have 6 or 7 signals for user space. Let's use them. I might write that. We're going to come back to that in a minute. And the last one is graceful restarts. Does anyone have that? Again, no hands. That's crazy when we think about how important zero downtime is, but yet we all have 30 or 40 seconds when the site might not come back online. Usually it does, so usually the boss doesn't kick our ass too hard, but that's really, really dangerous. And there's some solutions for that. Nobody's going to build them for us. We, as Ruby web programmers, we can build those tools, and we should. Because this isn't good enough. We've all seen this. How many people have a Capistrano restart task that looks something like that? Enough of you. Sudo kill process, kill my important web process. No, that's a typo away from a lot of downtime. Okay, I'm a little short on time, I'm talking too much. You can't get through this without talking about Heroku. They are doing absolutely everything right, and I love them, and I wish they could take more of my money and keep my websites online. But they had 2 catastrophic downtimes in the last 1 month. One was Friday morning, they were offline, everything on Heroku was down for some 2 hours. The same thing happened about a week ago. They're some of the best engineers in the world, and they screwed this up. They screwed it up because it's way, way too complicated, and that's okay. We happily give them our money and pay them to understand it so that we don't have to. But when it's so complicated, even they don't understand it, it's getting a little out of control. And I think we should, as a community, enjoy that Heroku exists, but feel some kind of responsibility to understand what's going on and understand what we're really gaining by Heroku. I mean, nobody likes doing deployment. I hate it. In fact, I'm maintaining Capistrano because I wrote documentation. Because I was the only person who understood it 5 years ago. I'm now maintaining it, and that says something. You know, when I take it over because I wrote the handbook, and I'm sorry, I know the documentation sucks, so that's entirely my responsibility. We have to understand some more, and it's really not that complicated. It's kind of scary, and guys with Unix beards, they're not that friendly, and they're all really old, but you know, it's not that difficult. Heroku released this. Some of you might have seen it via Hacker News. I really recommend all of you look at this list. It's 12 things that you should think about when you build an application so that it won't suck. It's really easy to deploy, it's really reliable, and you can scale it. And most of the things are just common sense. It's taking what I'm suggesting and really taking it to an extreme, writing it down, and telling you that you're stupid if you don't do it that way. I really recommend reading it, especially the stuff about, they have some stuff in there like don't use anything that doesn't talk HTTP, it just doesn't make sense, because HTTP works for basically everything. But take a look, you'll get much more out of reading it than you will if I try and say it to you. Okay, lightning quiz, because I have 38 seconds left and I'm really sorry, I'm going to go over. Nobody shout out, but I was drinking with a couple of you guys last night and this topic came up. Who knows the difference between these 2 commands? So sorry for the guys at the back.
One is forward and the second one is zero.
Right, so let's see hands. Who knows the difference? That's awesome. Definitely using Linux is what's helping you guys. I asked the same question at a conference in Manchester. There was 250 people and about 5 hands went up. It made me really, really sad. I had a high-level high-level talk about the details of deployment in Unix, and when that was the level of Unix knowledge, my talk didn't go that well. Yeah, exactly. What about the next one? What's the difference? Who knows? Okay, that's way less people. What's the difference?
It's load your user's environment already, so it's basically logging as a user.
Yeah, right.
The other one is just doing some stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly, perfect. When you do this one, you keep your own path, you keep your own environment, you keep your own shell prefixes, everything else. When you take this one, it switches your path for some user's path, it switches the environment, everything changes. So whenever you're working on a machine and the root has a restricted path, everybody makes this because normally that's the one you want. But when you're switching to root on a restricted environment, actually that destroys your path, you lose all your aliases, and this one's the correct one. But it's small enough that nobody really knows the difference. Okay. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to sign a contract, but this is something which I really think needs to exist, and it's something that stresses me out, because working on Capistrano, everybody puts the restart task in the wrong place, everybody's doing it wrong, everybody wants some multi-threaded rolling restart something, it's awful, sudo. I really want a tool that does this. Really, really want a tool. Sorry, you guys at the back, that says signal a process when a file checksum changes. This goes back to one of my 3 missing tools. Of the 3, this is the most important. And it's really, really simple. If the DSL looked something like this, and you guys at the back, you're not missing anything, it doesn't work. You know, Capistrano makes this revision file. If this would exist somewhere in the application, then you would have automatic restarts whenever you did a deploy because of a daemon installed on your machine, and you would never have to care about it, and it would just work. Rolling restarts could come from the script running every 30 seconds, 1 minute, and having a probability. Maybe it only restarts 1 every second time or something, I don't know. If any of you really want to get into open source, I'll help you. Just find me, we'll build that thing. I would love to work with some of you, any of you on that, because I think it's really important that people have my experience, which was being really, really frustrated that a tool sucked, that a process sucked. The only thing I could do was write the documentation, so I had a clue how to do my job. And in the end, that meant that I'm standing in front of you guys, thousands of kilometers from my home, telling you about what happened. Capistrano has been the best thing that ever happened to me, and it happened by accident. I didn't go looking to get some kind of mild internet fame by maintaining open source. I just wanted to fix a problem. And that started with acknowledging that there was a problem and really, really wanting to fix it, and not being happy with passenger mod rails and not being happy with everything else. The last thing I have to tell you is that when I started programming Ruby, passenger mod rails was in its first version, and we built a holiday application. We had a model called Passenger. It was the guy taking the flight. And the whole of the passenger Ruby code that gets injected into the namespace was namespace under passenger. We spent, I don't know, almost a year working on this application. We tested it thoroughly. We tested it on local, we tested it in production, running on Mongrel, and then somebody said, hey, you use Ruby Enterprise Edition. You have to use passenger too, but that's okay. And we did that and suffered a very, very big downtime. And of course, it depended whether the garbage collector collected our process first, or whether it collected the mod rails process first. And it worked about 80% of the time, and the other percent of the time it was throwing some C stack. And I was 18 years old. I didn't have any clue what was going on. I've been programming about half a year. That's such a horrible situation. Don't be me when I was 18 years old. So I encourage you all, please, if the problems in our community frustrate you, fix them. And if you can't fix them on your own, come find me, I'll help you. Thank you.